I think it's now fair to say that our brand new Impact Heavyweight World Champion Kenny Omega is likely going to be showcasing that belt more on Impact than he is AEW. This has then caused a bunch of people to go, oh, I can't believe it, it's not fair, and a lot of words to come out of their mouth. But to be honest, aren't you more interested in Impact at the moment because Kenny Omega is the champion? The answer is yes, so I really think it's working out fine. And on that note, it is time to go through the latest episode of Impact Wrestling, and hands up if you keep forgetting that it's moved to Thursdays. I would be one of those people, but thankfully, being able to catch up with Impact is really easy. They have it in so many places, so I thank them for that. Also, my name is Simon Miller, welcome to WhatCulture Wrestling. Let's take the finger of power, also known as the FOP, and we're gonna give the good bits an up and the bad bits a down. You'll disagree with me, but no, deep down in my heart, I still love you. Let's up those downs. Chris Sabin beat Rhino in the Under Siege #1 contender tournament to kick off Impact this week. That's like, oh no. Chris Sabin beat Rhino in the Under Siege #1 contender tournament to kick off Impact this week. That's like, oh no, Eric Young's gonna kill him. Given their sizes, this was a classic power versus speed contest, but really it was more about violent by design because super early on, Cody Deaner just grabbed Chris Sabin's leg, which meant Rhino was able to get in control. And you know why Cody did this? He was probably thinking, well, if I don't help somehow, Eric Young going to kill me, because if you haven't been watching the show, Eric Young is a psychopath. They clashed heads later on, which allowed Chris Sabin to get in some offense, but then this referee, I was like, man, come on, you fool. What are you doing? Because violent by design were then interfering again. So Rhino took his own finger of power and he poked Chris Sabin right in the eye. As we do know though, you don't need to see in professional wrestling. We learned that in 2020. So as Rhino was going for the gore, Sabin was able to reverse it into the most devastating move in all of sports entertainment, the surprise roll-up, or in this case, the magistral pin, which is basically just a surprise roll-up, and he got the win. Kind of did surprise me because I thought we'd put somebody from Violent by Design in there, but hey, I don't think either Chris Sabin or Rhino is going to win this thing outright, so either would have been fine. Up. We had then just the most bizarre segment next because as ever, you never know what Impact Wrestling is going to throw at you. But Brian Myers was being interviewed and he was all like, wait a minute, I beat Mark Cardona at Rebellion, why don't I have a title shot anyway? And it's like, well, it's not the worst point in the world, I can see where you're coming from. When all of a sudden things started to go a bit weird and Rosemary popped up and started talking to him in riddles. She also started reading his tarot cards and predicting his future, although it didn't actually work, because at no point did she say, you're about to be wrecked by the rest of Decay, because then there was Black Taurus, and he beat Brian Myers up. So I suppose we're going to do something between Decay and Brian Myers, and actually this was quite well put together, although again, it just came out of nowhere, and it was really, really odd. We then saw Kenny Omega, the Good Brothers, and Don Callis in the back as well, and there is still some kind of friction between Gallows and Anderson and Kenny Omega, because Don Callis was like, look, Good Brothers, you ain't doing good right now. In fact, you keep losing, and the reason this is happening is because you're not focused, and as a unit, we need to win. So the long and the short of it is that Kenny Omega is now going to coach them. He said he used to coach women's basketball or something like that. And how I took this was that Gallows was super excited, whereas Carl Anderson, well, maybe he wasn't so. And admittedly, I could have just read into that. But it kind of feels like on AEW, they're all fine. But on Impact, badness is a-coming. We will find out. Now look, I don't believe that any wrestler actually watches ups and downs, apart from Sami Callihan, although he doesn't watch, he just hacks in and screws up my day. And I also don't think anybody is influenced by what I say. That would be crazy. I am just a bald a-hole on YouTube. However, last week in Taylor Wilde's re-debut, I was a bit like, why did she get beaten up so much? Whereas this week, she was taking on Susan, and she was like an ass-kicking machine, and it was so much better. Up. I mean, even when Susan was trying to get some shots in, Taylor Wilde would always find a way to be in control. And when it does come to this feud, we have about a dozen stories coming out the other side. Because not only is Taylor trying to make her way through Deonna Purrazzo's crew so she can go after the championship, but you've also got everything with Tenille Dashwood wanting to be Taylor Wilde's partner. And that came into play here. Because about halfway through, Caleb with a K and Tennille came out here to even the odds because, of course, Kimberly, who was accompanying Susan, was being a right moron. I mean, Caleb with a K just grabbed her at one point, which allowed Tennille Dashwood to hit a neck breaker onto the ropes on Susan. She then turned around into a German suplex pin. And that's how Taylor Wilde got the victory. And I do have to admit that it would have been better if Wilde had just won without all of these distractions, but we are going to talk about that later. But surely something else is going on here. I don't trust this Tennille Dashwood. It smells fishy. And if you're wondering, well, wait a minute, where was Deonna Purrazzo? Well, she was in the back. And when Gia Miller went to try and find out why, much like last week, she was like, Deonna Purrazzo, man, I don't have to do what anyone tells me to do. It's an honor and a privilege if I walk down to the ring with you, so they better go out there and earn it. But then she got interrupted by Decay, and I was like, man, we haven't seen Decay properly for weeks, but now they're back with a vengeance, and Havoc. And because she was freaking out, I assume, thinking she was going to get beaten up, she went, I've got an idea. Rosemary, you can fight Havoc, and I'll go talk to Scott D'Amore right now, and we can turn that into a #1 contender match. Off she went. Following that too, we had a really solid promo from W. Morrissey. He was all like, man, people look at me and they only see a catchphrase, but they don't see the man behind my eyes. And also, when I was out of the limelight, all these fans turned their backs on me, so now I'm going to destroy them with my height. He didn't say that, but this was very well done, and he's actually adding depth to his persona. I'm very intrigued to see where it goes. Trey Miguel then defeated Rohit Raju in the Under Siege #1 contender tournament, and I said good. Sami Callihan's going to be in it, so should Trey Miguel. Up. Mahabali Shera was at ringside and kept getting some shots in, and we are going to talk about that in just 1 second. But the basic idea here is that Trey Miguel is a super athlete jumping around the place, whereas Rohit Raju is a little bit of a dick, and he will cheat and take cheap shots just to try and get on top. That allowed him to work on Miguel's arm for a little bit, but then Trey foot stomped onto Rohit, and honestly, that looked like the most uncomfortable thing I've ever seen in my life. But then Raju was able to lock in a crossface, and it was teased that Trey Miguel was going to tap out, even though it's Trey Miguel who is the master of the submission. So we did tease the finish there, but instead Miguel got out, he blocked a knee, he applied his own 1 hourglass submission, because again, he's the master of submissions, and he got the victory, and I was pleased. Thankfully afterwards, Jake Something came out and kicked both Mahabali Shera's ass and Rohit Raju's, because they have been toying with him for weeks, and I can only presume when we get to Under Siege, they're gonna have a match. Talking about that pay-per-view as well, we were then in Swingers Palace where James Storm, Chris Bay, Chris Sabin, Trey Miguel, and Matt Cardona got into it because they all want to be the new world's heavyweight champion. But James Storm, man, how did you not see this coming? You just got murked. Because Chris Bay wound Storm and Sabin up so much that despite the fact they have a friendship and was a tag team, James said to Chris, I don't want you out there later on. I can do it by myself. I'm James Storm. I'm the cowboy. I'm the best. I mean, seriously, dude, do you want to buy this rock? Because I tell you, it will keep away bears. And small spoiler, this does not go for him well at all. Right, back to that tease from earlier where I said we were going to talk about something later. Well, I have determined this time period now is later. The next match was Doc Gallows, the big LG, taking on Juice Robinson. And I'm going to give you just 3 seconds, otherwise this video will be too long, to figure out how you think it ended. 1, 2, 3. That's right, by interference and distraction. And the reason it was a problem on this specific episode of Impact is because in the first match, Violent by Design interfered and tried to run distractions. Then in the next match, we had Tennille Dashwood and Caleb with a K and Kimberly and everybody else trying to run in there with distractions and interference. And then in the match beforehand, we had Mahabali Shera trying to get involved with interference and distractions. And it made sense here as well, given what the Elite have been doing over the last few weeks. But if it makes sense here, don't do it in every other single match, because otherwise we reach the law of diminishing returns. And like I say, I wasn't looking out for this, but it just hit me in the face like a brick. So it's got to get it down. I really do enjoy Juice Robinson though, and he started off on fire here until Gallows gave him a cheap shot and then booted him in the face. He then continued to work over Juice's head and cheating as much as he could, and he also bit him. And I was like, is biting cheating in pro wrestling? I mean, I suppose it is, but also I've never seen a DQ because you bit someone. So now I have absolutely no clue. Robinson went after Gallows' leg eventually because you know he's a big guy and that's how you get a big guy to fall down for a canvas. And it worked to a certain point because he was about to hit Pulp Friction when Carl Anderson was jumping on the apron and Kenny Omega was jumping on the apron. They may as well have got a megaphone and gone, "We're trying to distract you." And it allowed Gallows to hit a sky high and he got the 1, 2, 3. So I guess you could say that Kenny Omega was right and he was able to coach him to a win. And at this point, Eddie Edwards ran out to try and make the save because, of course, Kenny Omega and the Good Brothers just jumped on Finn Juice. And it wound up with Eddie Edwards also having his butt kicked. I love it when good guy wrestlers try to come out to help and they fail. It would be like Superman flying into Metropolis and just watching it get nuked. Donna Perazzo's plan then backfired because obviously she had no real intention of going to Scott D'Amore and trying to make this #1 contender match. But unfortunately for her, Scott had already heard it and he was like, "I think that's a great idea. So at Under Siege, it will be Havoc versus Romery, and the winner of that is going to be facing you at some point in the future." Deonna didn't look happy, but we have learnt a valuable lesson here. Don't lie, it will always catch up with you. El Phantasmo then made his debut on Impact Wrestling, and that was kind of surreal for me because I've shared a locker room with that guy, and good grief, he is talented up. He was taking on VSK, which was also kind of sort of strange because he was making his Impact debut as well. So straight away you are watching a match and going, well, I know who's going to win here. It's going to be ELP, which of course is exactly what we should have done. In the early going though, they just went so fast, they had so much pace and they were going crazy to the point, obviously we're going to use ELP again, but make sure you bring back VSK. This was really good. After VSK had an early flurry too, including this like slam splash thingy-majig that he did, ELP did take over, and yes, he started doing his back rake thing. And I know some people don't like that, but I just think it adds to his character. It entertains me. He also started to insult VSK at one point, so if you've seen his character in Japan, it looks very likely that El Phantasmo is going to be carrying that on here. And it's because he did this and got too arrogant that VSK was able to get back into it for around about 8 seconds. Z smashed out a Yushika Roshi for a really good near fall, and he had the whole, "Oh, I can't believe my big move didn't win the match" face. But this just wound ELP up, so he grabbed VSK's nipples and twisted them, and don't pretend that wouldn't hurt, and then he gave him the big super kick, and he got the win. And honestly, if you're strange, and you only want to watch one thing from a wrestling show every single week, and now you're getting to Impact, this is the match you watch. Wrestling then went wrestling because our next match was Jordynne Grace taking on Keira Hogan because, of course, at the pay-per-view, we are getting Grace and Rachel Ellering taking on Fire and Flavor. And I already knew at this point, well, I bet next week we do the reverse matchup. And don't worry, there was a segment to prove that. But just talking about this match, it was really good too. Hogan used her speed to begin with to ensure that she was on the front foot, and she took Rachel Ellering's head and I think smashed it into every single turnbuckle as many times as she could, and she even did a couple of quick pins trying to get the quick win. But then Ellering remembered, oh wait a minute, I'm really strong. If I punch somebody in the face, they'll go down. So she punched Keira Hogan, and she was right. Down she went. It did work, but sadly Rachel's HP was already down, so she was vulnerable, which allowed Keira Hogan to slap her ass and then just kick her right in the face as she laid in the corner. And that is literally what happened. It actually felt like she was going to win this too, or at least that was what they made you believe, when out of nowhere, Rachel Ellering hit this pretty badass black hole slam, and it was so devastating, much like the most devastating movie in all of sports entertainment, it just beat her. Keira Hogan wasn't able to get up, and I could use more of that. You've got an incredible maneuver in your arsenal, you use it when you need to, damn right. So all this was really well done, and both competitors more than held their own, and yes, afterwards, we got a skit with both tag teams where we said, well, because we're gonna fight the pay-per-view, next week we can do Jordynne Grace versus Tasha Steelz, and they've got a lot to live up to, and I believe they can do it. We also stayed in the back too, where Don Callis was talking to Moose, and I thought this was really faboo, because we are just now taking a spotlight and we're shining it onto Moose and letting everybody know this guy, well, he's a little bit of a dominant force, so I, Don Callis, don't want him to fight Kenny Omega. Although it didn't work, Moose was like, you better shut up, pal. I'm gonna win a world championship, whether you like it or not. And I tell you too, I really do want to see Kenny Omega versus Moose, because that's one of those matches I never thought I would see. And from there, we transitioned into our main event, where Moose was taking on James Storm to see who was going to be in that Under Siege #1 contender match. It did what it had to do. They kicked the crap out of each other to begin with because they are both big guys and that's what big guys do, but it's the way Moose always gets in control. James Storm was going for an enziguri from the apron where Moose stopped him, grabbed his foot, threw him to the floor, and then grabbed his leg and just started to smash it into everything he could possibly see with a look on his face that made him look like a sociopath. I mean, honestly, he went after this limb like it was an unclaimed winning lottery ticket, and Moose, as of late, really is coming across as unhinged. He continued to beat him up and also tried to get James Storm to tap out, but after a code breaker and a tornado DDT, James Storm was able to get a near fall, and he went for the Eye of the Storm, but of course his knee by this point was basically plastic, it was basically mush, so he wasn't able to hit it and he collapsed on the floor. Because he is a veteran though, he still had the power inside of him to smash out the last call, but again, he wasn't able to stand, he may as well have had a peg leg, so he wasn't able to make the cover. And unfortunately that gave Moose time to recover. He then smashed him with the Hit the Light Spear to get the win and go into that Under Siege match. And if Moose doesn't win this, I don't know what the hell we're doing. We weren't done either because Moose then got a chair, he put it on James Storm's leg and he Pillmanized it. So now he ain't gonna be able to use that for at least 1 week, sometimes 2, you know what wrestling's like with injury. It was only then when Chris Sabin ran out to help and I was like, good work Chris, he's already dead. Although the commentators did make it very clear, like, well, if Chris Sabin had come out earlier, maybe he would have been able to protect James Storm. So maybe we're gonna do some kind of breakup there and have them have a match on the pay-per-view. And I wouldn't be against that. That tag team has kind of run its course. So if you want to do it, you should do it. I mean, you don't have to listen to me. What the hell do I know? Which brought us to the end of another episode of Impact Wrestling, and they are just trotting along quite nicely at the moment. I think it's kind of crazy that Under Siege is next week. I think their pay-per-views are too close together. Will I watch it? Yes, I will. Otherwise, how are we going to up those downs? But in terms of this one, is getting it up. Now, please do leave a comment below and tell us, what did you think of Impact Wrestling? Maybe you've only just got into it after Rebellion. I'd like to know your thoughts. Like the video, share the video, and subscribe. Head on over to WhatCulture.com where you can stay up to date with the latest wrestling news. Come say hello on social media. And there's boxes next to my head. Give one a click and watch another video. My name is Simon for WhatCulture. Thank you for joining me as always. Make sure you take care of yourself. Have a great little day, and I'll see you on the next one.